Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our last product session of the day. It looks like a packed house, which is great. For those of you that haven't been to this venue yet, we've been struggling a little bit with audio. So those of you that are past these glass doors, if at any point you struggle, please wave your hands. We're kind of having two mics duct taped together to make sure all of you can hear. There are seats up front here if you just want to hear a little bit better. But I want to thank you all for coming. Denver Startup Week is the largest free conference like this in the world. And it's free to all of you because of these amazing sponsors that we have here. But what I want to, we'll spend some time thanking the sponsors. But first of all, I want to make sure all of you, are enjoying your time here, but also that it's all of you that make these sessions happen. So thank you for taking your time, coming down, networking, all of you that volunteer to be a part of this. And this one's exciting. There's some product folks up here of products that I use every day, so I'm excited to hear about it. But more importantly, this topic is a good one that anyone in the role of product definitely encounters all the time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the team, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Everyone back there hear me? Yes. Thank you. All right. Welcome to Denver Startup Week, y'all. Thanks for coming. So before we kick it off, welcome to the product track. I don't know, I just pasted these about 30 seconds ago. Hashtag Denver Startup Week. Post any silly pictures of Bergen that you find. Make sure to tag her on Instagram. She loves those. Thanks to the sponsors. Presenting sponsor is Amazon. The rest of them are also here. Make sure to give them all of your money. More headline sponsors. Thank you to everybody who's supporting this. I don't really know how to announce sponsors, so if you couldn't tell, we're just going to zoom right through this. All right, so the title of our session today is How to Sell Challenging Ideas to Stakeholders. So we're going to, the format for this whole discussion, we're aware that every time you have to face a challenging situation with any kind of stakeholder, it's always going to be unique. There's no silver bullet and no recipe book for how to go about making sure that your ideas always deliver perfectly. So the format for this is we're going to kind of share some stories, talk about some strategies that have worked for us historically, and we hope that you pick up some patterns and some ideas for things that you face in your day-to-day. So to introduce ourselves, my name's Paul. I'm a director of engineering at Method. We are a software design, strategy, and engineering shop. We're kind of all over the country now. We used to be based in Charlotte, but now it's everywhere thanks to the remote world. And I'm based here in Denver. And I guess, go for it, Bergen. Bergen, you're next in the list.
Okay, I'll go. I am next. I'm Bergen DeVell. I am a senior product manager at Onyx Maps. Onyx builds maps for people in the backcountry. We started with the persona of a big game Western hunter, and we have since built out apps for off-road enthusiasts as well as backpacking and backcountry skiers for the winter season. So we are a B2C app. I work with our platform team that builds our base maps across the 3 applications. So I have worked for many B2C front-end teams in the past, but I am coming to this panel with the perspective of what it is like to be a platform product manager, and it's an area I'm super passionate about. And I think the more a product can get involved in advocating for back-end investments and platform investments, the better off the product will be in the end of the day. So I have a bunch of 30% off Onyx stickers at the end, so questions, come up and hang out after, and excited to be here. I will hand it to Jess.
Cool. Fun fact, got to ride over the Jeep road from Ouray to Telluride a couple weeks ago. It was. There's a reason I'm gray. But at times I would have really liked to have
this app.
Fortunately, we stayed on the road. We lived. Everything's good. I'm Jess. So for those of you who are seeing me for the 3rd time today, hello. I hope I have something new to say. Yeah, so my background, I started in agencies. And just a quick show of hands, how many of you are working in-house on product teams right now? It's like your company builds software. Okay, cool. How about those of you who work for like consultancies or agencies? Okay. Oh, wow, like 50-50 today. Okay, great, sweet. So that's where I started my career. So I like to say that that's where I cut my teeth on stakeholder management of all kinds because, these big companies are paying you loads of money to build these big software products. You really have to navigate those stakeholder relationships carefully. So lots of experience on that side of things. More recently, I was the director of product at Go Spot Check, which is now Form MarketX. It was acquired just a couple years ago. And since then, I actually started my own thing because I realized I wanted to give back to the product community, but not necessarily as a day-to-day product manager. So I coach product managers now, and I work with organizations who are trying to go from 0 to 1 on their product teams. So I'll typically come in when there's a founder or founders who are trying to stand up a product team from nothing or improve an early stage product team. So that's what I spend my time on. So lots of examples to pull from and getting people to agree with me or at least be willing to jump on the train.
Cool. Thank you, guys. One thing that we forgot to ask is, in general, like when you're facing challenging situations, what makes you uniquely successful to this? Like, what's your secret kind of strength or strategy about this? And I'll kick it off with Bergen since you have a mic.
Okay. I believe, and we'll get into this in more detail throughout the panel, but I think one of the essential parts to selling your idea is being an aggregator of other ideas. Where we sit in a product world, there are a lot of different experiences that you need to pull from in order to make those proposals, whether that's design, it's engineering, it's legal, it's customer feedback. I think one of my skills and one of the things that I've really tried to hone in on is taking that feedback from that cross-functional group of your stakeholders and representing that idea outside of your team. And I think the art of selling that idea is different in different organizations, and how you do that and your tools to do that might change depending on the situation. But I think regardless of how you're gonna present that topic up, make sure that you're going into that conversation with that varied perspective from all those teams. And I can't stress that piece enough, because if you're not on board or aligned with engineering and you're going in guns blazing as a product manager and 2 weeks later your engineering team is like, none of what you just sold them is possible, then you're kind of screwed from the beginning. So I would just put a lot of emphasis on that in regards to the preparation of preparing your idea. And it's something I feel passionate about.
So many microphones. So I agree. We'll talk about this a little bit. I'm a big believer in putting forth a proposal as opposed to being the PM who just shows up to facilitate a brainstorm for the 14th time. But I think the thing that I bring to the table, which is a lesson that I learned after really burning myself out by becoming too kind of personally attached to an organization that I was not the owner of, is changing my perspective on how I see the role of a PM. Most of the time, the ultimate decision on product strategy, on pricing, on go-to-market, on product mix, on hiring, those things are likely not your decision as a PM unless you are, the founder or in a leadership role of some kind. And so when I stopped getting kind of personally attached to these things and started seeing myself as a facilitator towards what is hopefully the best decision and presumably the thing that I'm putting forth because I've done the work, and realizing that in the moments where leadership does decide to go in a different direction, what's most important is that I'm almost impartial to that. So I need to put forth my proposal that's rooted in as much data as possible that I think is the best path forward, but learning to not take that seriously when and if that isn't the direction that's chosen. So slightly different take on it.
Cool. And to answer that question for myself, I think that, so again, I come from the engineering world, right? And I'm usually presenting a lot of really complex ideas and topics. And it really glazes over a lot of people. So if you don't present it right. And so generally my strength and what makes me successful in these scenarios is to realize that this isn't just the CEO that you're talking to. This isn't just the VP of product or something, just some name that has to give you the check mark. There's a real person there they have unique fears, they have unique concerns, they have unique goals that they're trying to achieve, and trying to connect with the deeper motivations with that person, and talk to them about how what we're proposing is going to be playing into what they're actually really looking for. That's something that I think I do pretty well, and it tends to really resonate with the clients and people that I work with. So should we do the kickoff questions, or should we jump into it? All right. Our kickoff question is: tell me about a time that you had to get somebody on board with your idea, and it worked. Because we swing and miss a lot. So
There was one time. I'm just kidding. I find this one in particular was such a win, probably for me personally because of the context. It was one of my very first fractional CPO roles. It was a local fintech company here in town. They were 15 or 20 people. The CTO and CEO co-founders had been leading product up until I joined. They had, I think, like a senior PM who had recently left. So they pulled me in basically to lead product as they were closing their Series A, start to really pitch, help them clarify the pitch for VCs so they could close their Series A. And it was around like end of Q3, beginning of Q4 of that particular year. So we're really starting to think about the roadmap for the coming year. Very limited resources, but tons of excitement around the offering and lots of traction. So I was in the room for multiple days just going over product strategy and trying to sort out a high-level view of the roadmap for the following year. And I felt like, based on the data that we had and what was already working in the customers, we had a series of items and initiatives in the roadmap that were really powerful. And the CEO, who I had a close relationship with anyways, kept bringing up this one feature set. And I'm wondering if any of you have done something like this. It was around custom branding. Has anyone had that? You're giggling. Yeah. Our customer, they need to be able to customize the colors, and they want to be able to put in their own logo. For those of you who have done this sort of project, it sounds really easy, but this was also like during that 6-month period when light mode and dark mode started to become a thing on iOS. And so he kept bringing this thing up. It was like we'd established what the different initiatives were going to be for the year, and he kept bringing up this one that was not connecting to the outcomes we were trying to drive towards. And I had all of this like personal baggage around this feature set because I had built it before. I knew how complex it was, and I knew that no one actually ended up using it. But he was convinced that all of these sales depended on it. We're trying to hit these massive revenue numbers so that we could get better terms for our upcoming round. And so I was getting agitated, of course, and I was like, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. And so finally, I decided to just shift my perspective, and I said, why do you think we should do this? And he's like, well, it's connected to all of these deals in the pipeline. We're going to close so much revenue if we can do this one thing. It's easy, right? Let's do this and we can close so much revenue. So I flipped the script and became the biggest champion for this thing. I was like, really? How much? And he's like, a lot. I'm like, okay, more than this other thing? Yeah. So I said, how could we get the data just to make sure this is as big as we think it is? And he's like, I'm going to go pull that from the sales team. I meet with them in the morning. I'll get you a number. Fine. Wouldn't you know, comes back to me a few days later. I had to kind of track him down. I said, so what did we find out? I'm stoked. I'm going to get started on this. And he says, you know what? It was actually just one deal. It's only, it's small. And I was like, oh, darn, But I got to be the good guy, and so it was like, what I learned from that is, like, I have a tendency to, I'm an Enneagram 8, if anybody knows what that means, but I have a tendency to want to be in control. I have a tendency to just steamroll other people. And so personally, that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, I took a totally different perspective, got stoked, and ended up looking like the good guy because of me, we didn't work on a feature that wouldn't have returned any value. Yeah. So there you go.
That's cool. Do I want to go?
No fighting, guys.
Sure. I think that one of the biggest impacts that I think that I cannot claim even close to a majority of credit for this because it's really, when it comes to engineering, it's really like a lot of people working together. But we've got a client who builds a lot, same thing, lots of brands, and they have lots of applications, and they have one application for each of those brands. So they might have 10 brands, but they've got 40 different deployed applications. That is a nightmare in engineering. That is a lot to maintain, and it's a lot of things that can go wrong. What we started realizing is that they all kind of shared some similar things. This is a financial client, and they all make a payment at some point. They all check your balance at some point. They all have the same kinds of flows. And every application and every experience was building these things from scratch. So they weren't just like doubling their efforts. They were 40 timesing their efforts, building it from scratch every time. And so we started putting in design patterns that are complex to them, scary to them, because they're used to building things from the bottom up. They've got a new client. They build it. They build what the client asks for, and then they're ready to go. And standing it all up individually. So our engineering teams kind of got together and proposed this idea of build once, repeat, use everywhere. We really had to get everybody kind of championing this on board with this, not just the primary stakeholder that we wthe talking to, but also every engineer who was about to subject themselves to this new architecture overhaul, and then all of the DevOps organizations who are going to have to support it, all of the sales folks from the client who are going to have to tell all of these brands that they weren't just going to have their own custom experience anymore. And it took a while. I mean, like, we kind of started slowly introducing it. But at some point, we really started like eating into the way that the rest of the organization deployed these applications and supported their clients. Now we are, I would say, 3 years later, everything is using this build once, repeat everywhere. And I would still say we've got a lot of work to do on it because you're overhauling the entire like informational like and experiential like world of all of these clients and this whole organization. So we have a lot of work to do, but getting everybody on board for that took years of slow introductions and selling the benefit over and over and over again. So
I do want to just +1 on patience. It takes a long time to, even if you know you're working on the right thing, to get all stakeholders bought in on this idea. And the idea of persistence is sometimes challenging, but it's key. One of the things that I feel has been a win, and this is, I mentioned I'm a PM and I work on the platform side of things, is our app works today. And we deliver an app to customers and they open the product and they are delighted. And so it's really challenging when you're working with an engineering team who wants to make long-term investments in the platform when something already works today. And that is a position I have found myself in a couple of times from a product perspective. And it's one of the hardest, I think, things to sell is if like the 40 times they've had to repeat it, like, did it work great? No, but it might have worked. And so I think that's one of the harder positions, whether you're in product or another role, is when something works, trying to get buy-in to, and typically on the platform side, make those year-plus investments in something that you're not going to see that immediate value. And this is a real pain point for me currently, and so I'm working through this one. And one of the things that I have done with the team in order to push forward some of these longer-term platform investments and decoupling our monolith into the concept of microservices is, again, partnership with your peers, particularly on engineering, where you can start to solidify and use data of, yes, these investments might take us 2 quarters or 6 months, but the first incremental benefit we're going to see is this time savings for other development teams to work within this service. And it's going to deliver data to our customers this much faster. And it's going to solve this number one customer support pain point that we get 10 calls about daily. And and if you could start to add up these benefits of the investment that you're trying to make, I think that really helps with selling the idea. And that has been something that I've been working through with those cross-functional stakeholders, getting customer support on your side, getting the engineering team putting forth the proposal, and showing those milestones that you can exhibit to stakeholders throughout that what can be a really time-consuming development initiative, but showing those incremental milestones is huge because that helps keep the buy-in, because I think that's one of the harder things of projects getting pivoted for other high-priority things, and then really using that data, and in your data example, like that made the decision very easy. So currently, we're trying to make an investment in a new service to power the front end. And as part of that, we're trying to propose separating platform teams from front end teams. And that's also coupled with an organizational shift of how we work. And so the biggest thing has been just partnership with my peers on the product team, where our team might own this service, they might own the front end UI. And really, it's selling that vision together. And I think that with some, support from engineering, because we can't do this in a silo, that has really helped the conversation move forward. So really just product is, I see it as like a player. You're a part of a team and you can't really do anything independently, which makes me sound lazy in my job, but I really do work with those other folks to sell the vision, because it wouldn't work by yourself. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm realizing how much time we have, and so I want to, I want to jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah. No failures. We never fail. Skip that.
So real quick, we this whole talk was kind of like loosely based on an article that was published on Built-In a couple months ago. QR code if you want it. It'll also be that I wrote, but try not to take all the credit. And so it's kind of a guide of like the life cycle of an idea, and obviously this is coming from the perspective of an engineer. So if you want to check it out, the QR code will be up there, but it's loosely wrapped around this outline of this life cycle. So we've got any idea that's coming, and you have to prepare it. You eventually have to sell it to somebody. You have to actually implement the idea, and then you actually have to follow through and make sure that people are going to stick with it and not backslide. So we're going to kind of talk through this life cycle and various strategies that we have for making sure that each step of this life cycle goes well. So to kick it off, preparing the idea. So we wanted to chat about like what are unique ways of preparing ideas that we know are going to get challenged. How we go about that each in our own way. So again, Bergen, if you want to lead us off.
Sure. I think before you can pitch an idea, you need to have a really strong idea of what outcomes you're trying to drive. And so for me, preparing the idea, there's a lot of work that goes into this, and we'll touch on different aspects of what that looks like for each of us individually, but it's the outcome that you're trying to measure and working back from that. Because if you don't have an outcome identified, it's really hard to get people on board to change, because humans don't like change. And so I think the biggest thing is outcomes that you're going to try to impact with this idea, and also how you deliver that information. I think there is the aspect of persistence and making sure that you are reiterating these benefits with your stakeholders, but you might have, I have bombed presentations where I've tried to take a complex platform idea to our C-suite, and they're like, I don't understand why we need to do this. And so maybe the layer cake analogy didn't work, so the next time around we went back with the Lego block analogy, and that one didn't work, so we tried the, robot pieces. Where I'm trying to go with this is, don't give up if the answer to the first proposal is no. It's really figuring out how to craft that message to your audience. And if your audience is engineering, I work with engineers to have architecture slides if the audience is our CTO. But if our audience is the CEO, or if it's our marketing executives, they're like, how much faster can I send a push message to our customer? And so I think you have to really cater that message to your audience, but it's anchoring on those outcomes that impact them in order to get that buy-in.
And as an engineer, it's my job to tell you, we can't.
We had some really good platform analogies using traffic, like street traffic and bus lanes. So you can use that one if you want. So I'm guilty, or what? Well, I'm probably still guilty of this sometimes. But something that I notice a lot in PMs, and I'd love if each of you, especially those who are active PMs at the moment, could reflect on this. But many PMs that I see who are having trouble with, from their perspective, selling their ideas, getting people bought in, getting people to understand, feeling like no one possibly gets this thing I'm doing or why I want to do it. One of the things that is a consistent theme with those folks is that we're not showing our math. So I don't know about you all, but if you spend enough time as a product manager working on a particular product, knowing your persona and your customers, you do a lot of quick calculations. Someone comes to you and says, we should have this feature, and before you know it, you have gone through, should we, can we, have we done that before, what do our competitor, right? Like you've done all that in your head, and you're like, yeah, no. Mm-hmm. But the people you're talking to don't have that context. So I think to your point, you need to understand the context in which that person you're communicating with lives so that you can show the right part of your math on why you are a yes or a no. So something, as I think about preparing an idea, and this is something that I did not do well for the early part of my career, I would let all that mental math happen, and then I would just steamroll and be like, yeah, no, we're not doing that, but we are doing this other thing. And I would not show any data or any information about how and why I got to that decision, even though it was probably very well considered, right? I had the interest of the business in mind. So yeah, I would say consider what you're putting forth as a proposal. I love the word idea because it's like creative, but your artifact should be a proposal. This is what we're doing. This is the outcome we're trying to drive, and show your math. Here's how I got here. Here's why I think it's going to work, or here's why it's important.
Cool. Yeah. And generally, my approach is to share what I'm trying to do with a whole lot of other people before I bring it to my stakeholder.
+1.
Yep. I try to let them poke holes in it, tell me all the reasons why it's wrong, and I welcome it. The other piece is if I get somebody who's related to that idea, so maybe I'm trying to find somebody who's a champion, and that's another pretty important part of preparing an idea is figuring out who your champion of this idea is going to be, who isn't you. And maybe just like teasing them with some idea of it and talking about what, or trying to fish out what they might resist it with. All of that resistance is good. Those are areas that people are catching you, and they're trying to like, you can see it as, oh, they're just fighting me, or you can see it as they just helped me reinforce how strong this is going to be because they found a hole. And so preparation is being ready for conflict to me, and being ready for to hear it and pick apart the benefits out of it. Find all the silver linings and all the dark clouds that you might face. So that helps me kind of like round out these ideas and really fill them in. So that kind of like starts leading into the next piece, which is selling the idea, selling the dream. So you've got something prepared, right? You've pulled together all of your data, all the reasons why something might work, all of the mitigations that you might have to do if a problem were to arise. How do you sell this idea to somebody, and really, like, how do you get people who are just probably ready to say no to just not do that?
Yelling usually helps. No, I'm just kidding. What's worked for me, and this is something I did not always do well, but but you have to, it helps to know those things beforehand. How many of you have set up a meeting with a whole bunch of people and then you get blindsided by a lot of feedback, right? The analogy I like to make is, if you were in the Senate or Congress and you've got a bill that's going to be voted on, we always have a sense, or it seems like they always have a sense of who's going to vote which way, right? And there's usually a few people who are a toss-up, but for the most part, if it's going to pass. That should be how you're feeling going into these sorts of conversations, right? It's like, oh, Bergen's totally on my side. She's going to be pushing for this, but I got to look out. There's a few folks on Paul's team who they're skeptics. I might need to be prepared to talk about this one aspect of the idea. So I think, call it lobbying, call it whatever you want, but I think making sure that you have a sense of how that conversation is going to go so that you can even prepare for those curveballs that might come up. And then the second thing, which might seem obvious, is the right person in the room? It's not always the person with a certain title. I've been at plenty of organizations where the, head of product, whatever that title is, isn't actually the decision maker on product. It's the CEO. So make sure that somehow, some way, you understand who actually owns that decision or what set of people own that decision and who influences it, so that you're talking to the right people to begin with.
I think there's an art of tailoring your presentation, and I don't mean just slides, to the audience you're presenting to. We at Onyx, a lot of our C-suite came from Amazon, and we use a lot of their practices, and some are good, some are bad. But one of the things I have enjoyed is the notion of a PR FAQ. I'm not sure if folks have heard of those, but it starts by you write it could be a lengthy document, but the beginning of the document sets out to your PR of once this thing has launched and what it has delivered to your customer, and whether that is your internal other developers using a service or your feature that you've delivered to your end customers. It puts you in a different mindset of why are we even doing this thing? Why am I very passionate about this microservice? And so it puts you in a different mindset of delivering the message to the audience of, and whether it's a blog post, an article, a Instagram post with this beautiful new UI, it's thinking of what outcome you're trying to deliver and working backwards from that in this document. So the anatomy of a PR FAQ, you dive into a lot of frequently asked questions through it. What are the challenges you're going to face? What are the wins? And it puts you in a mindset to really prepare for a lot of those questions that you will typically get while you're pitching an idea. So whether or not you work within these types of Amazon created tools, I would recommend looking up a PR FAQ, because it does help you hit on a lot of that pushback that you might get from stakeholders. You will probably already have an FAQ in your document, so you know how to answer that. And I do think that document in general, it has changed my perspective of the scope of a project by taking the time to write that document and be like, well, maybe I didn't consider this other thing. And so I think how you present your idea is a big part of all of this, and it's whether it's slides, whether it's a document, I think you do have to tailor that again to your audience. You're going to want a beautiful slide deck if you're presenting something to your CEO, but if you're working with other developers and other teams internally, that PR FAQ might be all you need, and you don't need to spend an excessive amount of time pulling together beautiful slides. That said, if you are proposing a customer-facing feature, I would strongly emphasize the need for that user research and as many interviews as you can conduct. Minimum of 5, up to 10. But if you can gather those quotes from users of, if you're proposing a new front-end feature and you can grab those customer quotes as part of that presentation, it's great to have high-fidelity designs included in your slides, but if you can get that customer quote of why that would be, I would be willing to pay for this, or this would change how I use your product. I know it's user testing and people can tell you what they want to tell you, but it's much better than not having those quotes in the slide. So I think just emphasis on who your audience is, and PR FAQs and customer quotes are two things that I think go a long way in selling the idea.
So I like hearing your guys' approach because it's so opposite of mine. So your approach is involve like a lot of upfront preparation for what sounds like kind of like one big touch point, right? One big proposal. And this is definitely a my style kind of thing. I wouldn't say that this really works for everybody, but I'm much more of a lots of little touches, lots of little one chat message, and like talking to a lot of the people who are going to be involved, and kind of very just simplifying my idea so much, saying, man, this would make this so much faster. That would be cool. And like just those little, oh yeah, it would be cool, are like those little bits of motivation that kind of they start building up. And that works a lot for me. Now, I'm also one of these guys who you're never going to hear the end of you're going to see me pop up 1,000 times in Slack all over the place. I talk a lot. And, but what it does is it helps people understand how I think and my motivations for getting things done. So what I try to do is just, again, coming from the engineering perspective where a lot of the things that I'm going to be proposing, talking to a product person, from a business perspective, my thing might not have any value, right? Like refactoring a feature so that it looks exactly the same, performs exactly the same, does all the same things, but it's going to take us 6 months of work. That doesn't sound very enticing for a business. But if I talk, start giving the little pros of doing this, the extra little benefits, small little doses that they can kind of slowly digest. When I eventually come to them, they're not totally surprised with this idea of this is going to take 6 months. They've already kind of bought on to the idea because they've been hearing it for a month of all the little ideas of why this might be a good thing. It's kind of how I start, planting little seeds to get people to also champion my product or my idea so that I'm not the only one who's fighting this battle,
If I may.
You may.
I can't believe I came off as the type of person who'd want to do a proposal. I wasn't even thinking slides. I was like, 2-page doc, people read it ahead of time. But I like what you're saying. And as you were saying that, I realized there's magic in being really forthcoming about the fact that I have an idea I want to pitch. That doesn't mean you have to, schedule some lengthy meeting with like 40 slides. But I do think a pitfall that I fell into a lot was thinking I had pitched an idea when really I just sort of said it offhanded over the coffee machine. And then I would get frustrated that no one took it seriously or like it never ended up in the roadmap or, whatever my frustration was. So I think I like what you're saying a lot of like greasing the wheels maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But you have to, I think, find that right balance in your organization. I've worked at generally really small places where like roadmap decisions were made, on a couch in the founder's office type of situations. Mm-hmm. So a slide deck would be ridiculous. It was like, can you draw it on the whiteboard? And if so, we're good to go. So you have to find the right fidelity that's going to make sense. But I really like what you're saying about when you say something multiple times, it can become real even before it exists. Yep. So I like that if we can pair it with make sure people know it's a proposal.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think another thing that I didn't really touch on, but I think is super important in that whole interaction is recognizing the shortcomings, right? Like don't act like your idea is infallible. If somebody starts resisting you, welcome it. There's a reason why they're resisting it. There's a reason why they might not like what you're talking about, or might not like the way you're going about it. Take that in, absorb it, smile and say, yes, what else? That helps a lot because they realize that they're not sitting here in a fight. They realize that you're on their team and their feedback's important to you. And making sure that everybody who's involved in this process really feels valued and feels like their input is important, that's going to be somebody that's going to eventually, hopefully, help you out, at least be much more likely to.
I have one more quick question for you.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel as if preparing the idea and selling the dream from a product perspective, my primary partner in that is engineering, because if I can't get the detail of the technical side right, then like I'm wasting my team's time, my own time, really the audience's time. So I'm interested from your perspective though in engineering, who your biggest champion is to sell your ideas. Like who do you partner with to get things done?
Absolutely product.
Okay. I just wanted
But it really,
it wasn't a softball. I was
No.
genuinely curious.
I would say that when it comes to like doing something with a product that I'm specifically working on, it's the product team and ultimately their stakeholders. But you can't always get the stakeholders on board. They don't always have context until you actually bring it to them. And the person that they're talking to the most, the person they have the most trust in, is the product owner. So that's somebody that you're going to have to make a really close and strong relationship with. And the teams that I see struggle the most are where those two parties are at odds. Yeah. If for whatever reason they just don't jive, they butt heads, that's where you start having real culture problems. You have delivery problems. I'm going to wait for a second. You have real challenges that start presenting themselves within the team, and it's more than just we can't get it done, because everybody in that room is probably capable of getting it done. It's just whether or not they're willing to come to the table and give up a couple of things or recognize where things are coming up short in order to do them. And that vulnerability is really what makes teams work together well. Transparency, like radical transparency and vulnerability is where teams really start to shine. You know how each other think, you know what your motivations are, and especially when it comes to a product leader and an engineering leader working together, you better be on the same page. Otherwise, your whole team's going to suffer. Power struggle. Yeah.
Can I toss that same question to you, but from a agency perspective where you might not be working directly with your development team?
Yes. I mean, so I work for myself now, so I'm typically partnered with leaders. But I would say it's usually for the stage of organizations that I'm working with, the CEO or whoever the founder or founders are. Which is typically a CEO and CTO of some capacity, or a director of engineering in some cases. But I think you're exactly right. What I often notice is it's a power struggle that happens where it's like ego, right? But it's like the CEO thinks it's their baby, the CTO wants to kind of build the best possible technical thing. Product is just sitting on their soapbox for whatever reason. And so it's often just finding that shared goal is going to help eliminate the power struggle. Because arguments that are often, unfortunately, the arguments often happen at the how level when we should be talking about and having alignment at the why and like the outcome level. And so what I notice is, regardless of who those people are that you're partnering with, if you notice that you're getting bogged down in interpersonal conflict, reflect on where the conflict seems to be stemming from. More often than not, I notice that it's coming from frustration around the how. We didn't, we approached the process wrong, or I don't believe that's how we should release it, or I feel like the pricing should be different, or whatever the argument is, where it's like, okay, but are we even aligned on what we're trying to accomplish? Is this a revenue move? Is this a retention move? Is this an adoption issue? And start reset the conversation to there, and often some of that alignment will fall into place.
Totally. Something that I also see as kind of along those lines is just generally trusting that the people that you're working with are good at what they do and have their best intent, have the team's best intent. I've seen a lot of groups kind of like, whether it's an engineering team or a product team, kind of pitted against each other. Their reasoning of this conflict tends to be, well, that's what they always do. They don't want to do X. Like they don't value tech debt. They don't, or the engineers don't want to build new stuff because they think that, unit testing is more important than product development.
They just want to gold plate that one piece of code for no reason.
That's right. And I think that the reality is you can talk about priorities. You can debate about priorities, but when you start kind of like taking it out as you're like on your team as what kind of decisions they're making is not in alignment with like what your motivations are and really what everybody's trying to do for the good of the team, you don't believe that they actually have the team's best interest at heart. And that is something that I see, it totally lines up with ego.
This is what I like to encourage teams to consider is the team succeeds or the team fails.
Right.
It's not the engineer, it's not the PM, although we do say the PM is the shit umbrella. We have like all the accountability and none of the authority. But that aside, like I think when that sort of stuff is coming up, that's a signal to me that we're being very individualistic with how we're measuring success, which can drive that sort of individualist thinking in these teams. And so I often am sitting in a leadership position. So if that is something that I notice, I'll look at how folks are measured. And like in an ideal situation, a team can be measured as a unit on the success of their product. So, in an example, I was managing a mobile app team, in addition to a number of others, but there's one team that owned our mobile apps. It was our highest traffic aspect of our product. And unfortunately, we were struggling with some data loss when users were working offline. Kind of a nightmare situation for a data product. But it was a really crappy situation because engineering was somehow taking this personally, like they were at fault because it was their code, and that's how like leadership was approaching the situation. When in reality, there were a lot of contributing factors to why that happened. And in fairness, those engineers had been pitching ideas for years about, addressing tech debt that eventually led to this situation. So anyways, all to say, as soon as we gave that team a target that oriented the team towards the same thing that didn't have to do with discipline, it was something like, 0 lost data or 99.9%, reliability or whatever the thing was. It shifted the conversations in the team from you did that to how can we get there, which is a healthier place to be.
Yeah, I think that recognizing that it doesn't matter how we got to this moment, this is the moment that we're in now. These are the new problems that we have to face. It's something that everybody likes to point fingers, but that doesn't help anybody, I'm recognizing how much time we have left. We have about 12 minutes. So I'm going to jump into the next phase, implementing changes. So everybody bought on. It worked. You sold well. Great job, you. So how do you get the organization to actually all buy on and implement the change? Like just because somebody said yes doesn't mean that you're done yet. Now you have to actually follow through. So what strategies do you have to make sure that everybody's still on board? It doesn't deviate. Some priority doesn't just derail what you just did. And make sure that the benefit that you were pitching really gets delivered.
This is actually where I do what you do to sell the dream. Is I am that annoying bug in people's ear throughout what can be a long investment in a platform initiative, or if it's a small tweak to the front end experience, I am that constant kind of, hey, did you see my Slack with that little video I took of a user using this new feature? Hey, did you see that thing I put in the roadmap in regards to that small incremental change that this new initiative is having an impact around? So in terms of implementing the change, I think it's just continuing as you do have milestones that you're hitting, continuing to emphasize those benefits. That way you don't lose this project when you get to your next round of quarterly planning, and it stays on the roadmap. So I think I take the approach of being I over communicate throughout the development cycle, the changes that we're seeing and the positive impact it's having for either customers externally or internally if you're a developer using something we've built, or if we have a quote from customer support, all the better. We had one less call yesterday. Everything that you can use as a benefit of the work you're doing and using that to keep momentum with the idea, I think is really important.
Yes, but also especially, so I've worked remotely now for 4 years, even before COVID. And writing things down is so freaking powerful. Like, and I don't mean to, into documents that no one's going to read, but figure out a way to capture that decision and make that a part of something that you're reviewing ongoing. I had an old boss tell me one time, and I just thought this was so insightful. He's like, that thing that you're actively working on right now as a PM, that feature, so for many of you, think about a feature you're working on right now. That is old news to your leadership. They're like, that thing's already done. I'm thinking about next year. I'm thinking about that next client I'm trying to sell. And it was this like kind of time and space continuum awareness that I suddenly had where I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I live in the past with features I already released. I'm living in the future with stuff I'm thinking about, but mostly I'm living in the right now. And to me, it's all so obvious of what we're working on. But many of the people around me are like way out in the future, perhaps. And so, writing things down and coming back to it often has been really helpful. And funny story, that feature I mentioned to you about branding, custom branding, and that CEO who wanted that, believe you me, that feature came up multiple times in the subsequent 6 months we were working together. It didn't just magically go away. But I was able to remind him of the conversation we had, check in again on data, make sure we didn't have any new data. So some of it was the humility to say, you know what, I'm not going to lose my shit today because he messaged me on Slack and said, what about custom branding? I'm going to stay humble and I'm going to, make sure that the situation's the same and just remind him. And remember that he doesn't have malicious intent. It's not his intent to ruin my Tuesday morning. It's probably just genuine curiosity.
Cool. Yeah. My general approach is to just keep things simple and keep on repeating them. So as an example, one of the clients that I was working with, they had lots of apps, and we kind of pitched them on just aligning all the tech stacks of all of these apps so they were using the same kinds of tools. Now, of course, there's going to be a little bit of variation depending on what the individual needs are, but for the most part, the major parts, we were saying, get all these things aligned. And what that meant is they had to rewrite a lot of stuff. That's a really hard sell. But we kept on repeating to them that the benefits of this were they could scale their engineering team, and as business priorities changed, everybody became portable. You could take somebody from here and dump them onto this other project, and they have almost zero spinning up time. They don't have to learn a new tech stack. They don't have to learn a new tool. They are ready to go, and they just have to get a little bit of product knowledge and domain knowledge. Repeating that over and over again, and talking about those value adds that we're going to come with aligning all of these tech stacks to use the same tools. Because, again, that is a bear of work. That's a lot of work that somebody's trying to do, that you're asking a whole engineering team to do. And again, to a business, it might not feel like it adds any value. You're saying, take the same thing, build the same thing, it's just using a different language. And I don't know, it's like at the end of the day, hopefully there's no new bugs. It's not that easy to sell. So you have to keep on simplifying and repeating all of those points of why they're actually doing this. The other thing that I like to refer to is just making sure that everybody, no matter how low or high on the totem pole they are, they're all bought onto it. If they're not, accept it. It's okay. Bring them into something else. And say hey, what are you interested in? You're not bought onto this idea. It's okay. There's a lot of value, and you're not going to get 100% of the people bought on. So what are you interested in? How can you add value here? And what are your ideas? And say this is what we're all trying to move towards. We can't just totally go against the grain here. So how can you add value to this process? You don't like this part, okay, what else works for you? And making sure that, again, every single person feels value, no matter what level they're at. Cool. And then, so again, trying to zip through. So you did it, everything's done, all the changes are in for the most part. So how do you make sure that it follows through, you don't backslide? And I kind of started talking about this a little bit, but just kind of like repeating the purpose. Who do you think are like the most valuable people that that you can get on board with, like kind of like touting this change? Is it just you, or is it, you know, the people who built it, or who do you think is like the most valuable ally in making sure that like this win is really like paraded around?
And celebrating it.
Yeah.
It sounds cheesy, but I like to think of those, what are they called? Those like thermometer things when you're raising money, right? And it's like right in the lobby and you color it in as you raise money. Right? Like how can you have that thing you're doing or that project you're working on be that visible? A real example from something that I worked on, there was a really contentious product feature. It was, you know, leadership believed it was one thing, the product teams believed it was another, and so we had tackled some pretty hefty usability testing, going so far as to bring actual customers into the office into a little usability lab to test out some prototypes. So really high visibility type of project in the organization. And we kept the results and findings up on Post-its in the lobby, so that every day people could see recaps of what we learned in the user testing. They could actually see the prototypes. So leaning into that transparency as well as it's happening, because you never know what level of visibility people might have. And sometimes just that is enough to kind of get people to feel comfortable with what's going on.
Cool. I'm going to kind of like echo one of your earlier points. You were saying that that like writing things down like makes things impactful, and one of my favorite things to do during a really long process where people might not understand what's going on or where things are, things like Jira only do so much. It's really kind of just an abyss of tasks, and like if I could kill Agile, I would. But
that's a talk next year,
that's
apparently.
Right. Safe Agile. That's really it. I love regular Agile, but like raise your hand if you think you do Agile right. Love that answer.
But I do stand-ups.
So in what I do is I take the work that we are slotted to do, and I kind of just make like a task list of all the milestones. Now that's not going to be everything that needs to get done. I'm going to keep on adding to it in betweens and stuff on the end and things that we run into along the way that we had no idea was going to happen, and now everything's broken, and what do we do? Those get added in. And what that does is it ends up creating this like really pretty timeline of how this thing got executed. You don't get that out of Jira. And you don't get that out of like most project management software, but it's really valuable to be able to see this is how we got here. And these are the steps that we got to take, especially if anybody else has to do it. Another team has to kind of do the same process you did, because usually it's not just you, right? They can see how you went through it, the problems that you ran into, and then your team can look at it and say, wow, look at all the things that we accomplished, and some of them were probably pretty hard. So talking about like how much work you put into it, how much value that comes out of it, keeping these things visible. I love your idea of posting things up in the lobby. The digital lobby right now is Slack and Teams. So just continuously talking about this stuff and presenting it to each other so that it doesn't just feel like you've been slogging through work without value. You're really making visible all the contributions that every person is doing. Even, no matter how small the win is, celebrate it.
On the smallest of levels, we had a really, really long project that we worked on, and we had like a team celebration where it was like in the afternoon, but we all grabbed our beverage of choice from the fridge in our respective homes because we're remote, and we had a closing of the epic party from Jira because it took us so long. But to your, like, you do celebrate everything and celebrate those wins with your team, because if you don't, then the next time you need to get their support and buy-in on going to advocate, they're gonna be like, well, we worked so hard on this last thing. And so, yeah, I can't stress that piece enough.
Totally. We've kind of gone through our programming for this session, but we did want to leave some time at the end. Now I realize we're at time. Do you guys have a couple of minutes? So we wanted to like open up the floor and see if anybody wanted to ask any questions or talk about strategies or things that worked for you. Just kind of share As we said, it doesn't always work. Like what we're talking about here is not a recipe. And we're curious what's worked for everybody else, or if you have questions about things that challenge you, go for it.
I'm going to stand up here because I'm off to the side. I have a general question about resistance. Now, you talk about seeing resistance as pointing out some blind spots of people that you need to work with. Do you have a way of distinguishing productive resistance, resistance that you really need to think about, from people who are just cynical, disengaged, and resistant to change and might not really be worth thinking too terribly much about?
I'll repeat the question because we're supposed to do that, and then you guys get to answer first. How do you deal with resistance, whether that's resistance you need to take in as critical input, or if there are often people in an organization resistant to change? So how do you deal with those two sides of the coin?
You get this a lot. There's this like trope of like the grumpy engineer who just doesn't want to see change happen. And that, because things work, right? Why would you change it, or why does the business want to do this thing? And there's real value in that person. That person has some knowledge that you might not be aware of. And kind of what I was getting at in the beginning was like really getting to their motivation. Why are they resisting? What's their fear? What's their frustration? They might just be frustrated because deploying new versions of your application is a pain in the butt and they don't want to do it. Like, that could be the root of their frustration, but it's coming out as, I don't want to do this thing that makes us translate our website into Spanish now. But it's really that they don't want to go through your deployment process, right? There's really trying to crack people open and get them vulnerable and talking about like what the root of their motivations are. It might turn out that they're just cynical. That's fine. But like not giving them an audience or trying to really like figure out like this person resists a lot of stuff. What is their frustration? Because they're probably not the only one. They're just the most vocal about it. That happens all the time in engineering, and especially in like big companies, you'll have a lot of frustrations that people just accept because moving the needle is hard. But it can turn into frustration that affects an entire team. Usually, there's a canary in the coal mine who's actually willing to talk about it.
I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, but cool. Yes. There's a decision-making framework called consent-based decision-making. I'm going to get kind of dorky for a second, but I promise it's worth it. How many of you have presented something and you end up with a lot of questions and, people have like reactions in the meeting, and then at the end of it, you're like, I think I have some action items? Right? But you're just like, really? I don't know. Paul just seemed kind of irritated. Should I do anything? I don't know. So I want to offer that as a framework. So consent-based decision-making, you can do it in a really rigid way, or you can do it in a less formal way, which is how I do it. But essentially, it boils down to presenting a proposal. So let's say I put forth a proposal, I want to build X, right? And so I would then ask you folks, do you have any questions? Which is an opportunity for questions that I can clarify, which might require an adjustment to the proposal. Once we address those, I say, do you have any reactions? Which is a really important word choice. The reaction doesn't mean I now need to take action. It just gives me a sense of where you're at. Maybe Paul says, sounds like a pain in the ass, but it's fine. Bergen's like, love it. Then the final thing is the most important, because the reaction is just like a temperature check. The final round is, does anyone have any objections? Which I love because it puts ownership on someone to vocalize a specific reason this particular proposal is not safe to try. Bergen might say, that puts us in a position of legal risk. Or maybe Paul says, that's a security risk. Those are objections. Those are things I need to address before we move forward. So for me, to your point about resistance, it's been helpful to introduce this sort of language with people so that in those moments I can say, thanks, Paul. Would you say that's an objection or are you just reacting? It puts, like I said, some onus on the other person to help me understand what, if any, action I should take, and puts me in the position of ownership on the proposal, my team in the position of ownership on those objections. So that's worked really well. Just even using those phrases puts people in the right mindset when they're giving feedback.
Anybody else? Does it? Sure.
Sure, here. Hold this near you.
Tell that story?
Yeah.
Oh, you're at Parcel?
Yes. He is. Mike T is great. There was a small feature in an app that I thought was really important. Couldn't get anybody to buy in. Engineering, product team, they couldn't make it a priority. So I prototyped it, waited till I crossed the VP of engineering in the hallway, and I'm like, hey, check this out. And I showed him, and he's like, that's really cool. We got to do that. It became a priority.
Ask for forgiveness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that if you don't have the coding ability to do what you did, I like to sell engineers on a day of innovation opportunities. I don't know if you all do those in your organizations, but if not, that's just a nice idea of something to bring back, because some of the best ideas that, to your point, have never been prioritized come out as of a day of innovation as a new feature that is on the roadmap. So if you don't get that, if you don't nail that pitch, which we all have missed many opportunities to nail these pitches, but I think taking advantage of those type of opportunities, partnering with someone that might be another advocate of the idea and using a day of innovation, and yeah, it's now a feature, which is really cool. Great idea. Thank you for that anecdote.
Yeah, I love that story. It's like those small touch points, but it's casual pitch. Love that. Anyone else? All the way back there. Yeah. So repeating it, we talked a lot about selling to internal stakeholders, but how do you sell to external stakeholders and get them to buy in with what you're doing and support you, whether it's with data or just their participation?
This is true. Prizes. I mean, Amazon gift cards, swag. So I'm thinking mostly about when I've tried to get customers to come in for usability testing or research of some kind. Sweeten the pot has always worked for me. Sometimes that's product discounts, whatever that might look like. So that's maybe a cheesy answer, but I've used that one plenty of times. I actually had a budget when I was director of product at GoSpotCheck of a significant amount for Amazon gift cards, and it worked. You get people on the phone for an hour with a $50 gift card. So
I have one.
Go for it.
One small thing to add to that is, I in your organization, if you have analytics of your power users, trying to find those as a population of people to pitch those ideas on first before you put it in front of your entire user base. So we have access to what we've created as these like custom segments of user interviews that we do of, you use our product all the time. Let me talk to you before I put this idea in front of a larger population. And I think if you can get those power users bought into the idea early and often, that's going to go a long way as well. So that's something I've tried to do as well in cohorting people.
Yeah, both of you kind of talked about like how does really providing the user with value, right? So like your power users are the people who are really motivated to make sure that your thing is growing in the way that they like, right? They're the most important feedback, and them just giving feedback is valuable to them. If they're not that motivated as a power user, like rewarding them like physically or with something tangible is a great way to do it. I used to give this data privacy talk, which talked about collecting user data, but like for a purpose. So like, for example, like you're a company like a Google that has a huge campus and you have an app for your campus and you start collecting user data. And most of our default response, or at least mine is, when an app asks me for my location, is absolutely not. And that's a pretty easy default that you don't really want to fall into. But let's say you're trying to create a new parking garage, and you don't just want to make any parking garage, you want to make it actually in a location that's actually valuable for people to park in. You know, like we're talking about a simple example here, but you're tracking user data not for any other reason than to actually provide real value for the users of your application. And informing them of what the purpose of what your data collection is, right? So if you're talking about getting their feedback for a survey, or if you're collecting location data or any other kind of personal data, getting their consent and actually like telling them why you're collecting this and why you want their participation and what they're actually going to get out of it, a better experience, but like specific better experience. Like we want to build this and we want to make sure we build it right. Something really valuable to them. So it doesn't have to be a tangible value that you hand to them. It's the promise of something better for them in the future if they participate today. And I've seen that work in analytics tracking. I've seen that work in trying to build new features and see how users are using current features in order to tie them together to make them more streamlined. And finding data users. Like you can, like the people who are willing to go through a very shitty version of your application and like provide you feedback. Like they will sacrifice their own experience so that you can have a better product for them. If you give them a real motivation for joining you on that journey, they're much more likely to actually participate and participate with value. Go for it. Sure.
School buses? I don't know that. Or traffic? You could do the traffic. No, there's many. The traffic, I don't know traffic either, so I'll learn about this traffic one.
I'm going to apologize in advance for anybody who doesn't want to get technical. Long story short, depending on the type of queries you're passing through to... Oh, sorry. Yes. So the question was, whoever mentioned having a metaphor for explaining platform initiatives related to traffic, could you please explain that? And that was me. And I cannot take credit for that. That was my DevOps team. So without getting into all the hairy details, and thanks everybody. If you need to take off, please. Well, this is sort of the mingling stage. You're not trapped. So, okay, so when you have databases, depending on the types of queries that are being passed into that database, you can run into situations where the performance of that database is significantly impacted. You're going to correct me. But basically, when you need to do just straight CRUD operations, that's quick. Your database isn't going to take a performance hit. When you're trying to do CRUD operations and highly complex calls to that database that is doing calculations in order to serve up the right data to a user, you will run into traffic jams. And so I'm highly simplifying, but basically when my awesome DevOps team was trying to get leadership and other leaders in the organization to understand why we were devoting a tremendous amount of effort to creating a bunch of follower databases, if you know what that means, copies of databases. They use the analogy of traffic. So we basically said you have an HOV lane or a bus lane, right, that normal traffic is never in, so it can just cruise through and then not get stuck in the main traffic that might be happening. And so they use that analogy to explain the purpose of having all these follower databases, which were creating challenges with reporting and all sorts of things. So it was basically a picture of a bus in a bus lane with their like epic explanation of what it meant.
Yeah. So I'm going to let this wrap up. So this is us. You want to talk to us more offline or online? That's us. Oh, yeah. Bergen has stickers. If you want a 30% off subscription to Onyx, chat with Bergen. And feel free to grab us after this if you want to just chat one-on-one. We're happy to talk. Thank you guys so much for coming. It's been so much fun.